this video, I'm going to show you how to make a sample API in Azure and build a custom connector and Power Platform to be able to consume it. So your first question might be, what is this and what are you trying to actually do here, Dwayne? And the answer is I'm trying to make it where I can show you guys how to create like a sample API that allows you to be able to go in and run a test. So imagine you wanted to create a demo where you wanted to be able to emulate an order from the Microsoft Store, or you wanted to create any other type of sample API call that you wanted to emulate a system that you don't have access to. These are places where when you're building demos and things like that, you need to be able to have these APIs to actually call out and be able to get those responses. But I want to build it in a way where I can do things like be able to have a conversation with it, be able to create an action so that I can wrap that action that connector or custom connector and wrap it into an action so that I can actually interface with it and talk to it like a human. Whereas if I do something different where I don't have a sample API, I really can't emulate what this is going to look and feel like when I connect it to a real API. So the trick here is let's go figure out how to actually build that particular sample API. Now, what I'm going to do is the first thing is you have to follow these instructions. You will have to have an Azure subscription. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to portal.azure.com, which is where I am right now. And I've logged into an Azure subscription that I have access to. Now, you'll come in and you'll say you want to create a resource and you'll want to create a function app. Now, once we create the function app, just go with the consumption, just the base implementation, because it's not like this API is going to get a lot of back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and say select. In this case, I'm using a MSDN subscription so that I don't have to create anything new. I'm going to also create a new resource group, and I'm going to call this just demo video so that we have ourselves a place to put it. Then I'm going to call this has to be unique as a URL. So in this one, I'm going to do Copilot Studio dude.azure websites.net. And then from there, you have to choose your runtime stack, and you're going to choose .NET, accept the 8 LTS isolated worker model, and you can choose what location. In this case, I'm just going to take East US, and know that for the case of what we're going to show in the demo today, we're just going to use Windows. Now, you can keep going through and doing more stuff, but I'm just going to tell you, you don't need to. You can just hit review and create, and then just go ahead and hit create. Now, this is going to go through and actually create the resource inside of Azure. This will take a second for it to do. Okay. So now our resource is actually deployed inside of Azure, and we need to go to the resource and we need to make a few changes to the resource. You'll see here that we don't have a way to just create the sample API directly in this. So what I want to do is I need to go make a few setting changes, and we can do that by going into settings, go into environment variables, and we'll go to the worker runtime here. And notice where it says .NET isolated, I just want to take the isolated out. And I just want it just to say .NET here. Once we do that, we want to apply. We'll hit apply and confirm. And now once we go back up to overview, you're going to see now I can actually create a function. Now that wasn't there before because of the fact that we didn't make that setting change. But now that we've created that, we can actually go in and create a function. And a function is going to be different API calls that you can make. So in the case of this, we'll do a sample here of one that I already have, which is a sample of an order from a Microsoft store, for an example. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create function. Now, once we get to selecting a template, we're going to choose HTTP trigger, and we're going to click next. Now here's a place where you're going to actually name it. So you're going to think, okay, what is the URL name or the function within the API that I'm going to call? And in this case, I'm going to call it like MS Store Order Status. Okay. But authorization level, actually, I want to switch that to anonymous. And the reason I'm doing this is I just don't want to have to deal with having to do authentication or things of that nature. Know that you can come in here and set those if you want in your sample API. But for me, I don't really need that. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to create this. And now that it's created it, you'll see that you have this sample piece of JSON that's inside of this. So this is where I've made things easier for you guys. So you don't need to have to worry about how to write this custom JSON or anything like that. I'm going to give you a sample that's available from my website. And the way to do that is to go to this URL right here, which is https://sample apijson.copilotstudiodude.com. And if you go to this, what you will get is you'll get this, which is a text file that has all the information in it. So we can just come in here and we can just copy this from the website. So just as easy as simply copying this and then coming back over and just click in here and hit Control A, and you can just delete out everything that's there and just paste in what I provided. Now notice down here that we've got the sample data for the order. And you can see we've called it order status and all of those different things. So notice that I could come in here and I could make modifications to this and I could add additional items. All of this is sort of the key things that you can do. Now, it's important that you get your JSON package right before you move to creating the custom connector, because if you change the structure of this, then it's going to change the way that the API is going to behave, and it's also going to mean that you have to redo some things in your connector. So from my perspective, what I've got right now is I've got all of these different pieces of information here that I wanted to put in. I could come in and change the price of this. Maybe this was on sale and I want to say $14.99 versus $19.99, things of that nature. If I wanted to add more, you can just add more items in here as well. Or if I wanted to change this description, I can change it. But I could also add additional items by coming in and just following the same pattern, just like right after this here, where I have shipping cost, I could come in and say shipping zip, and I could say equals, and if I want this to be a string versus a numerical value, I could come in here and I could say, 31211 or something like that as a zip code. And once I've put in the zip code, I need to make sure that I add that one last character here to be able to say that it goes and follows the same pattern with the comma. And then I can come in and I can hit save. And now once I save this, we can go to function URL. And once we go to function URL, this is the actual URL for the API. And you'll see they're all the same. So you can grab one of those, open a new tab, come in and paste this in, and you're going to get the JSON back to verify that everything's there. And you can even see that the shipping zip has been added here for me. So, because this is an example of the JSON payload that's coming back, so we can use this later as we continue on. But the idea here is that by doing all of this, we have went through and created what we needed inside of Azure to be able to create ourselves a new function that has an API that we can call. Now, we could come in and you could add additional ones, because you can see here we've got a function that we've created here, and we could come in and create additional items and things of that nature as well. So if we wanted to create another one, we could just simply create another one. and it would just be a different URL for the same service. So the beauty of this is that you're able to create like this endpoint that has a whole bunch of different sample JSONs that it's going to return back, and it's always going to return back that particular piece of information. Now the second part of this is going to be that we need to go create a custom connector so that we can actually start talking to this thing. So to do that, we're going to move over to Copilot Studio. Okay, now that we're inside of Copilot Studio, what you'll see is I've just created a blank Copilot. I've done nothing really to it at all. I will tell you that I will go into settings generally and come in and switch generative AI to generative just because of what we're going to do for our demo at the end. But again, this isn't necessarily required for you to do this. It's just something that I'm going to do for this particular demo in my video here. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to go create a custom connector now for the implementation or that API that we created in Azure. So I like to show you the easiest way, in my opinion, to be able to do some of this stuff. And the way I think it's easiest to do is just to come in and say, like, you want to export, and this will take you to the Power App Solution link. Now, once we have this link open, one of the things is you'll see custom connectors here on mine, but if you don't see that, you'll have to go into more and potentially all the way down to discover all. And you can scroll down, and under data, you'll see custom connectors. And once you go into custom connectors, this will load up and you'll see that you can create a new custom connector. And in this case, now, if you are an advanced user and you have a Swagger file and all of those things, it's great. But what I'm going to show you how to do is I'm going to show you how to do this manually so that way you can do this over and over and you understand how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New Custom Connector and create from blank. Now, we'll need to give the connector a name, and I'll call it MSFT Order Status. And we'll hit Continue. And then here, you'll want to give it a description in general. And this is important because this is the description that the large language model will use in order to be able to determine what this API does. So we want to say something in it such as, this is a tool that provides order status and order information for items ordered from the Microsoft Store. And so that should be good enough for now. And then now we need to get into the configuration. So you're going to need to make sure that this is set to HTTPS. Now I'm going to bring back over something for you guys to see because I want you to see how I'm going to go about pulling this together. And if you recall, we had this URL here that we had been playing with. So the best thing to do is you can just grab this whole URL and put it in your clipboard. And now this is the sample from where you created in your Azure implementation. Now, what I would suggest is that you can go ahead and just drop it right here in the host, and know that the first thing you're going to do is, because we've already got HTTPS here, we don't need HTTPS. So we can delete that. The other thing is that what we don't need is we don't need anything else other than the host name, because it's just asking for the host name. So I'm going to do a Control X here because I want to delete all of that and keep it in the clipboard. And then I'm going to paste it back in because in the end, I don't need this last part either. I just need the base URL. And so the base URL is going to be this API. So you can see here, you'll have the Copilot Studio dude.com or Azure websites, whatever your host is that you created whenever you did that in Azure. And then you'll have your base URL, which is API. And you'll notice that all of the exclamation points go away once you do this. Now, we'll go next, and you'll see here we're going to be asked about authentication. Now, if you built your API with authentication, you'll need to set up authentication here. But in this case, because of the fact that, and you can see here are all the different authentication items, but for this API, remember we did it as anonymous, so we don't need to define an authentication for it, just to make this simple for us for our sample API. Now, once we get past this, this is where we're going to have to define out what this API does. And the way to do that is we want to say a new action. And now the action is going to be something that we want to pull from here. So if you'll notice, right here at the end is the action. And that's the thing that you built inside, is like the HTTP trigger earlier. So you can just copy that piece of the URL and you'll put that in the operation ID. Now, on the summary and description, again, it's important for us to be able to say what it is that we want this API to be doing. So we'll want to come in and we'll want to say that this is Microsoft order lookup. This service allows a user to look up the status of their Microsoft order and order details such as tracking number and estimated delivery date. Now you could add more in here and add more and more stuff, or make it more descriptive. This will just make it easier for you on the back end and anyone who uses this API as we go forward. So now that we've created this, now the next thing is we need to be able to create a request, and it's going to say import from a sample. Now this will be a this will be a get API, so we're just going to be pulling things from the get, and the way to go get that information is we're going to want to pull it from here. Now there is a trick here, and that is we want this whole URL, but we also want to make it where we have to input an order number to look up the status of the order. So while the order will always return back the static order number that we've provided the details to, as you can see here, we will always return this data. But what you also want is you want it to make it where you can generate a question that says, what is your order number? So that you can make sure that you are taking that as an input. So the easy way to do that is you can just say order number equals, and then we can just put like 50 in here. And this will make it where we can come in and anything you put in after that URL, if you're not familiar with that, you can look it up online, but in general, it's like order number equals or something like that. Whatever you want to put, you can put it in. And then we'll paste that right here. And then we'll hit import. And by doing this, you'll see that now we have an order number that pops up down here. Now, if you wanted multiple items, you can do like an ampersand and then and such. But you can look at typical URLs and APIs, and it will structure this as what is the query that you're passing in with the API. So like an order number is an example. So now that we've done that, we've got ourselves order number. And we'll click on order number and click edit. Now this is where we want to take advantage of the fact that we want to give some descriptions into this connector so that people don't have to type all this stuff over and over. So one of the things is the summary is just another name for it, like a nice name that's going to be displayed. And then the description, I encourage you to come up with a decent description. And you'll see here that I've got a pretty good description in here about what the order number is. And I also want to make it required. If you don't make it required, then your action inside of Copilot Studio isn't going to fire unless you force it to. So just be aware that if you want a required input, you can put it here. If you don't want it required, then when you go configure your action in Copilot Studio, you'll need to actually say, I want to gather this information as an optional input. So now that we've done that, the next step for us is we're going to go back and we need to add a response. So when you look at this, it will just give you back a general response, but we want to make sure that the structure of the response is defined so that that way we can make sure that Copilot Studio and Generative AI can answer questions in a much more effective way because we want to describe what's in each of these different items. So the trick here is that you click on default, and once you click on default, you're going to see here that there is an import from sample. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back again to this sample output that we have here. And we're just going to copy this. And this is where it's super important that you've standardized your API before you do this. So you don't want to change the structure after we do this. We'll click into body right here. Notice that the text doesn't disappear, but you'll see the cursor blinking. So I'm inside of that. And we're just going to paste the example response in and click import. And now what you're going to see is we're going to see that there is all of these different items here that have been added. And these are the different pieces of information in that JSON payload that we just got back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one of these for you here so that you can see me do it, which is I click into email and say edit. And then I recommend that you do something like this. I have a text file that I've created that explains what each of these different items are. And you'll see in here that I've got a nice name for this, and then I have an explanation of this. I would prep before you go to this point and just make sure that you put these in so that you can come in and you can say, okay, this is the title of what I want to call that field. And then in the description, I want to be more descriptive than email. I actually want to put in a more of a model description or a large language model explanation as to what this particular thing is. And you'll see that I've been pretty verbose in the way that I've done it. Now I can go back, and you're going to need to do this for each of the items. And so I'm going to speed it up. You'll see me doing this really quick, but just know that this is a step that you're going to want to take. Okay, now, whew, that was a lot of copy and pasting, I know. But let me tell you, this is going to pay dividends downstream because once you've done this once, you don't have to do it again. And the beauty of this is going to be that anyone who uses this connector as we go forward in my organization won't have to type this stuff in anymore, and they won't have to write large language model explanations of what these things are. So again, really, really valuable work there, even though it takes you a second to get it done. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to say create connector. And now that we've created the connector and it goes through the process, you'll see it up here that it says it's saving. This doesn't take a ton of time. I'm going to let it run so you guys can see it take the amount of time it normally would take to be able to create one. But just know that once this is created, we can actually switch back over to Copilot Studio. So now's the next step. And the next step is let's actually go use our sample API that we just created. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm actually going to turn it into an action because I think that's the coolest thing that you can really do is now we can go add to this Copilot the ability to answer questions about order status or things of that nature. So let's go ahead and do that. So we click on actions and we click add action. Now we know what we called ours before, so we'll just type MSFT and see what we get back. You'll see here is our custom connector that came in. And yeah, guys, you can totally go change the icons and play with how you want to name it and all of that. That's all in the connector description. But once we click on this, what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and look at this connector. It's going to go, it's an anonymous one, so therefore you can see here that it doesn't need to create a connection. I'm going to go with the Copilot author authentication because I don't want to have a separate authentication for every user. I just want to use this anonymous API. I'm going to then click next, and here's where the magic happens, right? Here's where you can see all the effort that you put in before coming to realization here, because we now have a required input, so that's why this shows up with order number. We also see the outputs with descriptions for every single thing. And so all we have to do is click next and we can hit finish, and we'll let this go ahead and create our action for us. It just takes just a second to finish up. And voila, now we have this. Now let's go in and just take a look at this action really quick so you can see everything inside of it. And you'll see here that this is the definition of what it does. You can also come in here if you wanted to, just to show you, like I had a typo here, so we could fix that. We can also come in and say, look up order status for Microsoft Store orders, as well as information about the order, such as tracking and product descriptions in the order. And we've got everything ready to go here. You can see I've actually allowed this Copilot to use this action. I've got it turned on. Everything's looking good. We come over to our inputs, and in our inputs, I'm just going to say dynamically put this information in. You can even go in here and explain what an order number looks like if you wanted to. All of that type of stuff is totally at your disposal. You can even see there's additional settings and things of this nature that you can go do. You can even verify that it is an order number through the validation criteria, all of that type of stuff. And then we have our outputs. And you can see here, I'm going to say just respond, just dynamically respond with an answer. And you'll notice that all of these different things are available now inside of it. And it has both a display name and a description. And that description is what we put in as the description inside of the connector. So you're seeing the value come in. So anyone who wants to use this connector going forward to build an action doesn't have to worry about this. Now, if we got a particular thing like, let's just say that you didn't want the shipping zip to show up, you can hit delete here on anything in an action and it'll just delete it out. So that way we don't have to worry about if that API has information that we don't want to expose to the user of the API. This is where you can do that. So it's totally fine that the API gives back some information that you may not want to use in that particular action. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and we'll let this action save. And then what I want to do is I want to come in and I want to actually ask some questions, and let's actually try to use this thing. So I prefer to be over on the overview page when I do demos so that you can kind of see what it's doing. And if I say, what's the status of my Microsoft order, it's going to come back. It should go out and look for things. We can even turn this on to the conversation map so that you can see it go to work. And you'll see here that it goes, we need the order number. And you can see that it generated a question for us. Now, I'm going to put in the order number that is in the data, and I'm just going to go in and put this in. You can put whatever you want in. It will always return the same information, but for your demo, you will always typically use the order data that is in the actual data itself. And you'll see that it went in and it filled it all out. And now you've got all this information here. But the beauty of this is that because it's an action, I can come back and I can say something like, when will it get here? And it's going to go back and understand the order we're talking about. It'll fill in all the information, or it should. In this case, it did not. But you will see here that, and this is probably because I haven't defined an explanation of what the order number should look like. But the idea here is that we pull this order information back, and you'll see that it actually generated a follow-up question and such. So this is part of the beauty of being able to use an API in conjunction with actions to be able to pull this all together. If you want follow-up questions to work, again, the key was being able to turn on this setting right here. So I hope this video was super helpful for you guys. If you like videos like this and you want to get more, please like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of those. And as always, you can go try Copilot Studio at aka.ms/try Copilot Studio.